Want to learn how to get that professional bass sound? By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how to EQ your bass so that it fits into your mix perfectly. Let's get started. Hello everybody, Dylan Pines here with another mixing tutorial for you. Today we're going to be talking about how to EQ bass. Now this is mostly talking about how to EQ bass guitar, but a lot of these concepts can still be applied on EQing bass synthesizers, or even upright bass. Throughout this video, we're going to be learning all of the ways that we can clean our bass with EQ, ways that we can enhance the tone of our bass with EQ, and ways that we can create space in the mix for our bass to live and create space for other low-end instruments to live. So let's dive right in, shall we? So I like to EQ most of my instruments in layers. That means that I'm going to have separate EQ plugins to accomplish separate tasks or achieve different goals. That way, I'm able to focus on one thing at a time rather than feeling like I have an EQ plugin open and I have to do everything and anything as possible. It keeps me focused, it keeps me working in my workflow. So the first thing that we're going to do is do what's known as cleaning EQ. And that's going to be going in, doing some filtering, taking some maybe unnecessary low end or unnecessary top end out, and searching for any room resonances, seeing if we need to cut anything with a surgical filter. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add FabFilter Pro Q2 and let's give this a listen.
And I'm angry 'cause I've grown up to become you.
Now usually we're going to want to do most of our mixing in context of the mix, but for this I'm really just trying to get rid of stuff that's not going to affect the tone anyway. So I'm okay with soloing it. So I'm going to add just a little filter on the bottom, little filter on the top, and I'm going to just sweep them up until I start to hear a tone difference. Now, some people might be really confused why I'm cutting anything out of the bottom end as it's a low-end instrument. You know, for most genres, the sub bass really is not all that necessary. Sometimes it just kind of ends up muddying your mix up. Now, that's obviously not true for a lot of electronic genres where it's going to be played back on speakers that have subs that are club speakers that are really adept at actually pushing those frequencies out of the speakers. But if your song is going to be played on speakers in like a car or in a regular stereo system or headphones, those aren't really going to be able to reproduce those frequencies anyway. They eat up valuable headroom. So I like to just cut off a little bit just to make mixing a little easier. I'll solo this out. You probably won't even really be able to hear really much of what I'm cutting anyway. It's just sort of room noise. Yeah, that's all I really want. So now I'm going to go in here and cut some of the top end. Again, what we're trying to do is just cut out stuff that's unnecessary that you're really not going to hear in the mix anyway, but it's just going to be adding energy that could potentially cause some masking problems. So I'm going to go in here, and once we start losing really a lot of what makes the bass, then we'll back off. That's obviously too far. That's feeling a lot tighter. Let me solo this. Yeah, we're really hardly losing anything. Okay, cool. So let's do a quick before and after. So here's before. Here's after. Great. I mean, I can barely hear it, and that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. That means I got rid of some energy, but I didn't lose any of the tone. Okay, so now I'm going to see if I need to cut any room resonances. Now, these aren't really quite as common in electric basses. They're more common in acoustic basses, upright basses. They're not common at all in bass synthesizers, of course. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to make a bell filter. I'm going to lower the Q a little bit. I'm going to sweep around and see if I hear basically any frequencies that really stick out to me, where it sounds like that note is happening no matter what note the bass itself is actually playing. Now, I'm not sure if we'll find anything here, but it's still good to check. Yeah, I'm really not finding anything. I'm just going to close my eyes and listen, because most room resonances, if you really search for them, you'll be able to just hear, like a high pitch or a mids pitch that is just happening no matter what. So let me try that real quick. I hear some mids energy that I'm probably going to want to cut, but it's not a resonance because every single time the note changes, the note in the mids also changes. So that's just energy. That's not a rogue frequency. So we're not going to have to do any of that for our cleaning EQ like I might have maybe with a more poorly recorded bass guitar. All right, the next thing I'm going to want to do is my tonal EQ. For me, I honestly really like to do this on a fresh EQ plugin. You don't have to do this. I mean, it's going to add to your CPU. For me personally, I just really like having each step of EQ, each goal that I'm accomplishing, being a different plugin so that I can just keep my thoughts straight. I don't have to focus on what I've done. All I have to focus on is what I'm doing right now. So with tonal EQ, I'm really just trying to make the tone better. I'm not trying to make it fit better with the mix. I'm not trying to make space for any instruments. I'm obviously not trying to clean it because we've already done that. I'm just trying to make the tone better. And then once we get to the next step, then I'm going to try to fit it into the mix. And sometimes that means undoing what I've already done. And honestly, that is 100% okay. Now, this is another one that you can do in solo if you'd like to. That's a bit of a controversial topic for me. I tend to do a lot of my tonal EQ in my mix prep. I treat it more as pre-tape EQ, and I do most of my mix EQ more as spatial EQ. That's up to you. I didn't do it this time, obviously, because I needed to show this to you in this video. So for me, it would be technically in solo and technically before compression. But for you, if you'd like to make sure that you're doing it in context of the mix, during the mix, post-compression, do it. It's whatever works best for your workflow. But for me, I'm going to leave it in solo so that you can hear what I'm really trying to do. And then for the next section, then we will go in and listen in context of the mix. So let's listen real quick. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a little bit of the mids, and I'm actually going to cut a little bit of the low end. And I know that you're going to think I'm crazy for doing that, but there is a reason. There's so much low end in this bass that as I turn it up in the mix, it's going to be really, really difficult to hear it and still get the energy that we need. So I'm not honestly cutting the low end tonally as much as I'm just going to be boosting everything above the low end because I'm going to be using my gain staging, my output level, to compensate for what I've lost. But first things first, let's find some of that mids energy I didn't like before. Kind of right here. Yeah. Okay, yeah, some of that like wah, 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 wah. I don't really like that. So I'm going to cut that out. I'll probably get a little bit of a more narrow band. Let's try that out. Okay, that's sounding pretty good to my ears. So now let's go in here and cut out a little bit more of our low end. And for this, I'm actually going to use a shelving EQ rather than a belt because I'm really just trying to take the whole thing, move it down a bit. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to select low shelf, take it down just a few dBs. Now, obviously, we've lost a ton of energy, so I'm going to want to gain stage it. So I'm going to bring up my VU meter over here, and I'm going to listen. Let me make this a little bit smaller so that I can actually see it. I'm going to do a before and after, and we're going to see how much volume we lose. Okay, so here's before. Okay, so kind of sitting between 5 and 2. Here's after. So we've lost quite a bit of volume. So let's take it up maybe 4 dBs. Let's try 5 dBs. Okay, that's feeling better to me. We do before and after and just listen with my ears. So here's before. Here's after. Ultimately, I could really just hear the top end better. I didn't actually end up changing much of the low end at all, and that was what I was going for. I still want to get rid of more of the mids. The mids are still bothering me. Okay, that's sounding a little bit better to me. Now, of course, tonal EQ really just depends on what your particular bass needs. So, for example, your bass might have a lot of gunk in it, so you might want to search for areas where you can take some of that gunk out. That usually tends to live in like the lower mids and the mids, some stuff, what I like to call bloopy. Like it's not like low end boom, it's not top end clicky, it's just that like bloop, 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 that kind of stuff. So you might want to search for some of that you can scoop out. You might also want to be searching for sort of like the clickiness or slinkiness of the strings as it's being slapped. Sometimes there are particular basses that are just really clicky. That usually lives up in the upper mids and the top end. Now on the potential boost side, if the bass is too weak, you might need a bass or low mids boost. That might be needed. This particular bass obviously needed more of a cut in that because I needed more of the top end energy so that I could hear it in the mix. On the flip side, if the bass is too dark and distant, an upper mids or a mids boost might be needed. I might need to be boosting up here even more than I already have with just increasing the volume by 5 dBs. It totally depends on the needs of your bass. Just whatever makes your bass sound best to your ears. So now that we've done our tonal EQ, let's move on to spatial EQ. So this is basically what we're going to be using to actually create space in the mix for the bass and create space in the mix for other instruments. Now I've already gone in and done a little bit of compression just because usually I would do compression before I do this style of EQ. So I added that in. I'm only doing very subtle amounts of compression just to level it out. So spatial EQ is what we're going to be using to create space in the mix for the bass and to create space in the mix for the other instruments around the bass. All we're going to be listening for is what is masking the bass and what is the bass masking. How can we get everything to gel just a little bit better? So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to grab another EQ, and I'm just going to listen at this point. I have a few tricks that I'll show you, but I'm just going to listen.
And I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to...
So obviously we are masking the kick quite a bit. There's a lot of bass going on. It honestly might be a little bit too much bass. Like I might want to turn the overall volume down, but I'm going to want the kick and the bass to just play more nicely together. So I'm going to do what's known as pocket EQ. And that's basically where I'm going to boost somewhere on the bass. I'm going to cut in the same place on the kick. And then I'm going to boost somewhere on the kick and cut in the same place on the bass. So I'm going to go down to the kick. I'm actually going to solo these out just to make this a little easier. And let's really quickly just look at where the fundamental frequency is. That's just basically the one single frequency where most of the kick is centered around. This isn't something that's in the bass, which makes basically finding the place to cut on the bass and boost on the kick quite a bit easier. So it looks like it's 65, something like that. This one is actually a mix of two different kicks, one that's a sample, one that's real. So it looks like there's two different fundamentals, one at 100, one at 60, about 65. So we might want to go in and actually do maybe one big boost on the kick and two cuts on the bass. going to give both of these a 3 dB boost exactly, just because that's going to make it easier to do the opposite on the bass. So I'm going to go to the bass, and I'm going to place one of these at about 62 hertz. 62. I'm actually going to set the other one at 100 because that's about where we figured out where it was. I'm going to cut both of them by 3 dBs, -3. And I'm going to make their cues very, very small. So this one is going to be, I'm going to set both of these cues to 5. Okay, so now let's find a place that we can boost the bass and cut it in the kick. It's already a lot easier to hear the kick. I think I'm going to boost around 200 in the bass. It's going to be a little bit of a wider boost, say maybe around a Q of 2. Still going to boost it by 3 dBs. Let's set this around 200, and we'll go over here and do the exact opposite. So 200 -3 dBs with a Q of 2. Yeah, it's already a lot easier to hear them. Let's listen in the mix.
And I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, to become you. I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, but I still love you.
I'm going to turn my bass down a little bit. It's just a little hot.
And I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, to become you. I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, but I still love you.
We really quickly take some of the compression off of this, just because I think a lot of the kick is getting caught by it.
And I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, to become you. I'm angry, 'cause I've grown.
Yeah, great. Now it's a little bit easier to hear the kick, and the bass is starting to really fit into the mix a little bit better. Now here's one trick. If you still want the bass to cut out a little bit more, maybe, you've got the low end where you need, maybe you've already boosted your upper mids, but it just isn't really going the way you want. Try adding some parallel saturation. That's a great way to get the sound that you're going for. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to add some saturation. I'm just going to grab, let's say, Sound Toys Decapitator. It's always a good one. And I'm just going to
wreck it.
I really am. I'm going to make it sound pretty terrible, and I'm just going to mix it in very quietly. And the reason I'm doing distortion, or rather saturation adds some compression, but it also adds new frequencies. Distortion tends to take frequencies away. Saturation tends to add new stuff. And if I can focus that in on adding stuff in the upper mids, I might be able to turn my bass down a little more and still be able to get it to poke out of the mix. So I'm going to solo this real quick. Let's give this a shot. Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. Now it's super gross, but that's exactly what we want. I'm going to mix it in real quietly.
And I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, to become you. I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, but I still love you.
Yeah, even just a little bit is really all we need. Just barely.
And I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, to become you. I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, but I still love.
I like it. I think it sounds pretty solid. So let me go in here again. I'm just going to listen one more time in the mix. I want to see if there's anything else that I can cut specifically in the bass. Maybe where it is masking some other instruments.
And I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, to become you. I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, but I still love you. And I'm angry, 'cause I've grown up to become you, to become you.
I kind of feel like it's masking a lot around here.
'Cause I've grown up to become you, but I still love.
Cool. I'm feeling good about that. I really think that that is going pretty much exactly where I need it to go. Now, with spatial EQ, not only doing EQ to get the bass and the kick to fit well together is important, but also just making sure that it's not covering up anything else. Now, there's a lot of bass in the low mids, and the low mids are a traffic jam section of the mix. So you might have to do a cut like I made, just to get everything to fit together, just to get everything out of the way so that the things that need to shine, which usually is not the bass, can actually shine. Now, that doesn't mean you have to make a cut here. Obviously, I just needed it for my mix, but if your mix doesn't need a cut there, maybe it's not having as much of a problem in the low mids, then leave it be. You don't need to EQ unless you need to EQ. So that's it. That's how you EQ your bass. Hopefully you're going to be able to go and make better low-end sound with your mixes. But here's the thing. This is only one small piece of the puzzle. If you're trying to get mixes that are ready for the public, you can get this perfect and you could still end up with an amateur sound, especially if you're making mistakes in other areas. So that's why Rob Mazes, the founder of Musician on a Mission, you've seen his face a million times probably, well, he put together a free workshop where he shares the 7 steps to making radio-ready music at home. He's created a new approach to home recording and mixing that's going to help you do all of this stuff so much faster. And seriously, it hasn't only worked for him. Over 36,000 people have already been through this workshop, and they've seen results in their music in just a few days. So if getting pro mixes is what you want, now it's your turn. If you want to learn the exact 7 steps that will take your mixes to a professional standard in under a year and keep you from wasting precious time, money, and effort on all the wrong things, then go and watch this free workshop now. Just click the link on screen or down in the description to get your access. It's totally free, and seriously, you're gonna love it. And as always, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. We make tutorials and tips just like this one every week on the channel. We would love to help you grow. Okay, that's going to be all from me. This has been Dylan Pines with Musician on a Mission, and remember, create regardless.